First of all, sabhi ko mera sadar pranam, which is my respectful greetings to everyone. On my behalf, as well as on Professor NEDU's behalf, I shall begin by thanking Lumen Publishing for the invitation. Many thanks to Professor Sandu, Mrs. Huidu, yourself, and the rest of the team that I will not mention here for the interest and support. I'm likewise grateful to Professor NEDU for accepting the invitation and sharing the space with me. Since the topic of our meeting is gradual individuation of the human being within the universe and the preservation of cosmic order and harmony through ritual, that is according to Brahmanism, allow me to state that this individuation may be perceived as having either a higher or a lower degree, depending on where one is positioned. Namely, if one follows one of the main tenets of the Mimamsa tradition, which in a very general sense highlights the fact that the man's core responsibility is performance of correct and complete rites and rituals as per scriptural precepts. This can be understood actually in two ways, either by embracing the view that the human being is highly individualized in his position as a sacrificer, since only a select parts of society can and could attend such sacred events, or by embracing the opposite view, which is man being a part of a social, religious, and cultural matrix. Individuation is of a lesser degree, since he's only a small wheel in a large machinery. Now, whichever the path is chosen, it is some sort of individuation nonetheless. Now, let us start from an idea highlighted in one of the Upanishads, namely in the Chandogya Upanishad. This translation is Robert Hume's translation. Now, what people call sacrifice or yagya is really the chaste life of a student of sacred knowledge, a brahmacharya, for only through the chaste life of a student of sacred knowledge does he who is a knower find that world. That would be, I think, the 8th Prapataka and the 5th Kanda and the first verse of it. It doesn't really matter, but if anybody is interested, they can check. Now this came to mean that basically any act that involves any type of surrendering something dear to the worshipper was deemed a sacrifice. This is only to show that the idea of sacrifice was much broader in the Upanishadic era. However, earlier in the Vedic texts, the approach was quite different because epistemologically in the Mimamsa school of thought, Shabda, or the word, was paramount. That is to be understood the Vedic word, of course. The Vedas were the supreme authority that was not to be judged or doubted. Consequently, acting as per scriptural precepts became a must. It was the norm. So much so that the entire existence of man was mapped out in careful, deliberate steps, following complex patterns and successions. Now, since my specialty is the Karma Kanda, which is the action, this part deals with numerous types of texts, starting from the Samhitas, so the actual Vedas, up to the Brahmanas, which are probably around the most important ones from the Vedic corpus, and down to the Sutras. Since having a timeline in Hindu philosophy and also in history, in the history of the Indian population, is quite a difficult task, what I shall mention here is just a broad sketch of a timeline. So basically for the Samhitas, we have somewhere in between 1500 up to 900 BCE. And then for the Brahmanas, we have approximately from, let's say, 900 to 700 BCE. And then the sutras may be up to about, let's say, 500 BCE. Now, in the sutra literature, we also include the Kalpa Sutras, Vedanga texts, which are the auxiliaries to the Vedic corpus, the Grihya Sutras, which are part of the core corpus for the Mimamsa tradition, that is the ritualistic side. And also occasionally we may find information also in the Dharma Sutras, even in the Shastra texts. And basically much of the life of a Hindu, even a modern Hindu, is based on orthopraxy, which is the correct and adequate performance of ritualistic acts. In my book, which is also the thesis of my PhD thesis, that I think was published last year, I have made a clear distinction between the idea of rite and ritual. In my presentation, whenever you hear the word rite, I shall only refer to the rites of passage, and I shall shortly discuss them. Now, since we mentioned rites of passage, before entering the realm of rites of passage, I need to state something important, namely how the term sanskara, which is the traditional way of referring to rites of passage in, let's say, Sanskrit, but the word is present in modern Hindi as well. I proposed in my thesis and the book a threefold understanding according to the level of depth. The first one would be a philosophical sense, and that is to be found in the Sankhya tradition, which can be translated as either instinct or disposition. The pragmatic sense, which is the sense that interested me and interests me, namely the appropriate performance of rites and rituals as per the Mimamsa tradition. And then the ethical sense, which is the most present nowadays for the modern Hindu, which is a very modern way of comprehension, of course, and refers to the set of moral values that a person may possess. Now, I have discussed, and my specialty is the rites of passage, the 16 ones, that is the Shodasha Sanskaraha, according to the Vyasa Smriti. Very, very quickly, I shall name them just to have a sense of what is actually celebrated and highlighted in a Hindu's life. Because I was saying a few minutes ago that the entire existence of a Hindu is mapped out in particular steps and successions. So we first start with Garbhadana, which is the laying of the seed. Then the Ponsavana, which is the prayer for a male heir. I shall not enter the discussion why a male heir and not a female. Simantonayana, which is the parting of the hair. Jata Karma, the birth rite. Namakarana, the naming ceremony. Nishkramana, which is the first outing. Annaprashana, which is the first solid meal. Churakarna, or chola, for instance, that is the first tonsure. Karnavedha, the boring of the ears. Vidyarambha, the beginning of study. Upanayana, initiation. Vedarambha, the beginning of Vedic study this time. Keshanta, the first shaving, especially for boys. We also have Ritu Shuddhi, that is for girls, but they are not exactly, the Ritu Shuddhi is not exactly mentioned in the scriptures. Then we have Samavartana, which marks the end of the study and the coming home of the student, because it implies studentship for quite a long period of time. Then we have Vivaha, which is the marriage rites, the wedding ceremony, which is probably one of the most important. And of course, the funeral rites, Antyeshti. Now, in my book, I have discussed about how could we map out the most important ones from all the 16? Maybe to make it easier for other people who are not that interested in, let's say, the Indian side of the world or the Indian subcontinent, and would still like to understand a bit from whatever India means in a deeper sense. And I ended up choosing 5 as fundamental rights, namely Namakarana, which I equated to what we have, especially in Romania, as botez, so basically the baptism, because giving the name implies that now the person has a role in society and is easily identifiable in a social, cultural, and religious matrix. Then we have the Upanayana, which is very important because it legitimates certain rights and privileges that are not to be obtainable if the Upanayana is not done at all. Then Snana or Samavartana, the returning. If that particular rite is again not performed, the person ends up being in a limbo, in a liminal state, not being able to go back to whatever it was before and not being able to progress and to move forward. Then the Vivaha, because without it, you basically, again, end up in a liminal state. And the Antieshti, because the circle of life also has to end in order to new beginning to happen. Now, since all these are special events in the ontology of a human being, they are, of course, celebrated accordingly. Their ordering quality is unmistakable as they follow basically a natural progression, natural stages of a person's lifespan, from birth to childhood, adolescence, maturity, old age, and of course, finally death. Whenever this natural order is disturbed, the event is corrected with specific prayers and ritual acts. Now, this is, let's say, the bird's eye view, and then we can also have the mapping of the life of a Hindu per day. Now, we find scriptures in which there are Pancha Mahayagya available for each person to perform every day. Now, these Pancha Mahayagyas have different names. Very, very briefly, I shall mention them. We have the Deva Yagya, which can be performed by throwing something into the fire, because the fire, Agni, is the messenger of the gods. Deva actually means deity, let's say, God. Then you have the Pitri Yagya, which can be understood in 2 different ways, either as Pitri meaning the ancestors, or Pitri meaning the elders of the family. So whoever is the eldest, those are the people to be served. So you either sacrifice or dedicate something to your ancestors, or if you are more modern and want to be more connected to whatever happens during your lifespan, you will serve your elders. Then you have the Bhuta Yagya, which is basically respecting and offering whatever one can to animals and plants and anything alive around you. Then you have the Manusha Yagya, which is being hospitable and feeding the needy, being hospitable basically to the humans around you. And finally, the Brahma Yagya, which is considered probably one of the most important, and some say it should be performed daily, some say it is, occasional. That is the imparting of knowledge. Now, of course, that the imparting of knowledge should be, first of all, spiritual, and then whatever the person considers necessary. Now, in a very strict and conservative setting, these were to be performed every day, and they would, of course, take up the entire day of the Brahman or of whoever chose to perform all these yagyas. But of course, in modernity, even a simple gesture is equated to performing one of the yagyas. And I hope I was clear enough in how well mapped and how little is left to maybe personal choice in some sense, because there's also a popular saying in the sense that whenever the person has little time to his her own, the person is less prone to mistake and to committing sins, which is why the scriptures have been thought out and direct the span of the day and of the life of the human in such a way that these are to be avoided completely if and whenever possible. So since I dealt with the karma kanda, so the action and acting by performance of rites and rituals, probably Professor NEDU will better explain the jnana kanda, the more intellectualized version, in which it's less about action and more about thinking and brewing. Thank you.
Hello to everybody.
Thank you for your presentation, Hilda. Thank you. Please feel free to present now.
Okay, it's my turn, yeah? Okay, so I'll deal more with what an individual being is according to Vedanta. Vedanta being the later part of Brahmanism. Hilda dealt more with Mimamsa, which is the exegetical and ritual part of Brahmanism, but I'll deal more with the cognitive approach of Hinduism. So according to Vedanta, I don't know if it was clear enough from Hilda's presentation, but according to Vedanta, man is not as much a being, an entity, but it's rather something which happens in the universe. I mean, man is rather a phenomenon, an event occurring in a cosmos rather than an entity. So this has two major implications. First of all, is that in Hinduism we cannot speak about any sanctity of life. First of all, life is simply an event. It's not the destiny of a being, but it's something which simply happens. And secondly, the belief in a personal entity which has to be preserved or redeemed or cultivated is just an illusion of our minds. So basically, through this approach, Hinduism dissolves two major illusions we live in. First of all, is that we are some beings which have to be cultivated and respected and eventually saved from or brought to eternal life or something like that. And secondly, we also get rid of the idea that life, whatever it is, under all of its forms, is somehow sacred or valuable by itself. So first of all, in Hinduism, life is nothing more but materialization of some kind of energy which goes through the cosmos. That is the so-called karmic energy. Karmic energy is a kind of willpower, but it's not an individual will, rather a cosmic will, a will of existing as an individual. So this energy goes through the universe, and at some specific points it gets some more coarse forms as beings, not only as human beings, but all beings from the universe are nothing but materialization of this will, of this cosmic will. So a human being is, as you already stated, a human being is nothing more than a coarse form this energy takes. It's interesting that they state that the beginning of a human being is from the very, very early stage of seminal liquid. So a human being starts from the stage of semen. This obviously this precludes all kind of claims that life could be sacred. Since life starts from semen, this means that human beings are subjected to a very tough slaughter, because as you know, from millions of cells from the semen, only one survives in a very fortunate situations. Therefore, most of the individual beings that start living die from a very, very early stage. It's somehow like the way, you know, fish reproduces. A fish gives birth gives birth to many cubs, but only very few survive. Somehow the situation is similar with humans also, because we have millions of human cells, of proto-embryos in the semen, but only one of them survives. So the fortunate one that survives goes into the womb of the mother. Here also we find something very interesting, that Hinduism doesn't claim that at that stage you have a being clearly separated. We have a text which explains this process of how the individual experience takes place. The text is Editura Upanishad. It's one of the earliest Upanishads. So they say there that in the womb, the individual is not still an entity by itself. It's like an organ of the mother. So that's why they say the embryo does not hurt the mother, because somehow they are not yet differentiated. So we can see from this that life is rather a matter of quantitative individuation. Life is just a phenomenon which gets more and more defined, but it's never an entity by itself, which stands by itself in an independent way. So the fortunate cases are those in which a germ of individuality from the semen reaches a womb, and there it gets a more coarse form. Obviously, after that, the next stage of in individuation is birth. According to Brahmanism, birth is not really an important event, because as we have seen, individuation started from the very early stage of semen. So birth is just a step whatever from the evolution of an individual. I think this is quite important for abortion-related issues. If birth is nothing more than a simple stage from the development of an individual, this means that we cannot differentiate very clearly between between the condition of a human has before birth and after birth. Somehow they are quite similar. They are both human conditions, but they don't have the same degree of individuation. That's it. There is more quantity of life in case of a born person than in case of an unborn one. But basically, it's often just a stream of life in both cases. So after birth, obviously, the person starts developing more and more. What is interesting is that this development is not the development of an entity, but just the development of a stream of experiences. Therefore, we have a very strange perspective, since a human has different degrees of humanity. Yeah, I mean, the more he advances in life, the more his humanity gets more and more coarse. So I'd say that a human being is not a matter of being, but rather a matter of happening. And in the old age, what happens is simply that the human being diminishes himself. So it's very strange, because we tend to see that there is a being which is constant there, but instead, in fact, according to Brahmanism, there is no being there. There are just experiences, just a stream of experiences. Death is nothing else than the cut of a series of experiences. So there is no entity which dies, but just a series of experiences ends. Now, what happens after death? We are quite familiar with the theory of reincarnation or metempsychosis, which states that there is a kind of that life continues in another body. In fact, I think there is a very widespread misconception about reincarnation, that there is a soul that reincarnates. In fact, we don't find this theory, at least not in the early text of Brahmanism. According to early Brahmanism, what survives death is just the karmic energy, which is totally impersonal. So we don't deal with souls, with entities, but we just deal with some kind of energy which gets a coarse form and then it takes a gap and then it takes another gross form. But what is important is that there is no personal continuity between two different births. It's just the energy that continues to exist. It's just the karmic energy which is preserved, but no personal entity all along this way. So we don't have any kind of post-mortem's destiny, personal destiny. All you have after death is just the preservation of the karmic energy. Therefore, I would say that in Brahmanism, life is more about karmic economy than about a personal destiny. Since there is no personal destiny after death, but only karmic survival, obviously, what is the most important thing is just the way we deal with the quantity of karma we bear. So I'd say that this perspective is important for today's thought. Is important for two issues. First of all, for abortion-related issues. We tend to Western thinking is troubled by the question when life starts. In Brahmanism, as we saw, somehow life starts from a very, very early stage, from the stage of semen. But as we saw also, as we also saw, all these human embryos are subjected to a very cruel slaughter. So most of the individuals die from that stage of semen. Therefore, I'd say this brings some kind of argument, some kind of justification for the abortion, because anyway, a huge part of the individuals die from a very, very early stage. So in case of abortion, we just cut a karmic stream. There is nothing else. There is no entity being cut off. But just the karmic stream gets interrupted. And also, I'd say it's important for euthanasia-related issues, because as we have seen, life is not as much a matter of, I don't know, of a destiny, but it's just a flow of karma. So I think somehow euthanasia becomes acceptable, since anyway, karmic energy, which is the most important thing in all this process, survives. So this perspective is not really peculiar only to Hinduism. We have it also in Buddhism. In Buddhism also we have only experiences but no beings. You know, the first noble truth of Buddhism is life is suffering. But a very interesting statement is that there is no one that suffers. There is only suffering. So human life is just a stream of suffering experiences, but there is no subject of suffering. We have a similar approach actually even in Western thought, in process theology. In process theology, we don't have beings, but we just have streams of experiences. And there also, consciousness is subjected to various degrees. Whitehead even stated that maybe we should not wonder whether animals or other kind of beings have consciousness, but we should rather inquire ourselves to which degree they have consciousness. So this is quite similar to our approach of Hinduism, because in Brahmanism also, as we have seen, human individuation knows various degrees. It's just a matter of gradual individuation. Strangely, an old man is not as much human as an adult. An adult has more humanity in himself. So basically, this is my presentation which stated that human beings are not beings, but streams of experiences.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you, Ovidiu. Thank you also, Hilda-Hedvig VARGA, for your presentation. I noticed that we have a raised hand, and this is the opening of the questions and answer session. Alexandra, please, can you address your question? And we also have Antonio Sandu, who would like to come with a question. Who will be the first?
Andra will, because she raised.
She's a lady. Oh, she's the first raiser. Okay, Andra?
I was faster. See.
Okay.
Okay. So I have a question for Dr. NEDU, if I may. I was listening very carefully to your presentation regarding the fact that with reincarnation, there is no actual soul that reincarnates, but actually there is a pool of energy where strings of energy come to or become certain manifestations of the physical plane, if I understood correctly.
Yeah.
So please, if there are any misconceptions about some things that we keep hearing on and on about reincarnation, can you please give us some insight about that? And I'm speaking about things that are so common. The following concept, a family of souls. So when people speak about reincarnation, usually you hear them say that that pool of energy contains a family of souls that are somehow karmically linked. And then people say that there are old souls and young souls. The old souls are more evolved and they have more experience and they have plenty of reincarnation cycles. And then the young souls are just barely born. And tell me something about these concepts and if they are just misconceptions or... Thank you.
They're not really misconceptions, but they are later stages of the development of this doctrine. In the early stages, we didn't have any soul at all. The concept of soul, jiva, the one which bears the karmic energy, appears much later in Hinduism. In the very early stages, we just had karmic energy, a kind of a cosmic thirst and hunger, and that cosmic thirst and hunger gets reincarnated. It's only that cosmic desire which reincarnates. We don't find any mention of any soul within the very early texts. There we have discussions only about energy. Nevertheless, even in the early period, we have some a little bit vulgar texts which deal with previous lives of some religious personalities. For example, in case of Buddha lived quite early, in the 6th or 5th century BC. So in early Buddhism, we have two texts. No, actually we have one text, Jatakamala, which describes the previous births of Buddha. Well, obviously that text assumes the existence of a soul which transmigrated. But nevertheless, we have to consider one thing, that text is a little bit later than Buddha himself. We don't know its exact date, but it's written about the beginning of Christian era. So, but I would say it's somehow a kind of vulgar interpretation of theory. Obviously, these days, this interpretation, okay, let's not call it vulgar, prevails in the world, because even Tibetan Buddhism, as you know, deals with the reincarnations of Buddha, and Dalai Lama being one of the reincarnations of Buddha. So this theory is quite widespread these days. But I find it very interesting that in the early stages, we didn't have any personal continuity within the chain of reincarnation. It was just energy which turned various shapes with some gaps in between, but no personal continuation. Actually, we have one text where it states, one moment, please. I don't find it now, whatever. But they describe the process of reincarnation, and the karmic energy simply reincarnates as whatever, as worms, as pigs, as tigers, as anything. So I say that actually in Vijnanavada Buddhism is one school of Buddhism. There we have a cosmic consciousness which takes together all the karmic traces. So that cosmic, let's say, storehouse or tank of energy or whatever, takes in an undifferentiated way all the karmic traces of all human activities. And from that cosmic consciousness, which is where everything is together, where everything is mixed, a new reincarnation issues. But I'd say that what is missing in this description of the process of reincarnation is simply a soul which would transmigrate. obviously this theory, the theory that you stated about old souls and more evolved souls, somehow I think this theory somehow is quite pleasant to our feeling of spiritual evolution. Because obviously, if we don't have a soul that is subjected to some kind of evolution, we may say that all efforts are vainless. Because if we don't liberate this life itself, so all this energy just vanishes. So I think somehow the theory that you mentioned is somehow appeared later just to justify the kind of spiritual struggle. But I don't know, if we take another perspective on life, like life is simply to be lived, not to be directed towards any point, then the theory that I'm supporting also has some sense. Life is not something just to be brought to some point of liberation where there is no karma, but simply but in life we simply have to deal with the present karma we have here, so we just have to consume it or whatever. So I'd say that your theory somehow had to be elaborated in order to justify spiritual progress.
Yes, thank you very much for your answer.
According to my views, according to my opinion, that theory is much later, and it's somehow subjectively issued. We don't find these traces in the text.
I think the theory is a little later in Vedanta, because it's a mixture with Samkhya, where yes, we have Purusha. Purusha that's transmigrate in Samkhya.
No, Purusha does transmigrate.
Purusha does transmigrate, but he looks like transmigrating because of Prakriti. So Prakriti is the one who did this, but it is look like Purusha is the one who transmigrates. So maybe this was later transferred to as being Jivatma or something like this, and that's they try to mix this together and say, well, we have Purusha and we have Atman, and let's mix it together. Atman is not the soul. Atman is the divine, but the divine present in the body somehow, because Shankaracharya is very late, and later Shankaracharya says, oh, Atman is Brahman, but he said these statements come from Upanishads, not from Shankaracharya itself. But in modern understanding of Hinduism, they mix together what is Purusha, what is Atman, and that's why they say it's old soul and new soul and something like this. Maybe because they try to understand how Purusha, that is those who is free for forever, but is combined with Prakriti, and it seems like they have transmigrates together or not. So maybe the like, but I understand. My question was about, when do you think, when you because I didn't study this yet, when appeared the concept of Atman in Vedantic?
Actually, Atman is not a philosophical concept, but it was a pronoun initially, which had a meaning like self or something like that. So it appeared in Brahmanic texts, where during the Brahmana period, they started to find the Atman of all beings. But the Atman is not initially doesn't appear as a philosophical term, but simply it appears rather as a noun, as a pronoun, meaning self, nature, own nature, something like that. The term itself is quite strange. It is a masculine these days, but it's not these days in classical Sanskrit. But at the beginning, it was a pronoun actually, Atman. So it became very important during the Brahmana period. In the Upanishads, its sense is already philosophically refined. We have a clear philosophical sense in the very early Upanishads. So it gets somehow shaped in the Brahmanic period. I have one full book, if you want, about the search for Atman in Nirankari, is the author. If you want, I can send it to you. If you can read it, it's very boring actually. But...
Thank you. Now I see that we are going to the networking. Thank you for your discussions. Those were very interesting, and I'm sure that the discussion could be enlarged in a next event or a next meeting, maybe an online meeting or a physical one. But for the moment, we have to end this session. And if there are no other questions, I propose you to finish this session and have in mind next meeting for continuing our actually yours discussions.
Okay, thanks.
Have a great
I
day.
have Dr. Nedu's phone number at this point, so I only felt that the discussion has just started. So
Thank you
networking
for
after the
participants. It was a very interesting discussion on what Hindu spirituality, on Hindu approach on rights and on religion and on spiritual path, for example, could or should be. Thank you again for all participants.
Thank you.